It was one of those November Sundays where the light came in weak and golden through the lace curtains, but the air outside still carried the ghost of summer, just warm enough to confuse the trees into holding onto a few stubborn orange leaves. I was sprawled out on the shag carpet in our living room, that deep rust-brown kind that seemed to collect every crumb from every dinner we'd ever had in front of the TV. My elbows itched from the fibers, but I didn't care. I had the TV guide spread open in front of me, the glossy cover reflecting the glow from our old Zenith console television. You could hear the faint hum from its tubes, like the TV was taking a slow breath before giving you the picture. The smell of Mom's Swanson chicken pot pie was curling through the air, mixing with the faint chemical sweetness of her Jell-O 1, 2, 3 chilling in the avocado green frigid air. The kitchen clock, the round one with the rooster in the middle and the second hand shaped like a fork, ticked steadily, marking the seconds between her soft clatter of aluminum pie tins. Somewhere on the end table, my can of Pepsi Free sat sweating a little, already losing its fizz because I'd gotten distracted by the radio. Casey Kasem's American Top 40 was playing from my GE digital clock radio, the one with the red glowing numbers that never seemed quite right unless you smacked the side. Outside, Dad's 1979 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme was parked at the curb, still ticking softly under the hood from the drive back from St. Mark's Lutheran Church. Dad always parked in the same spot, right under the street lamp, as if the lamp belonged to us. The vinyl roof of the car gleamed a dull brown in the late afternoon sun, and the chrome trim caught tiny flashes of light every time a car passed. I had kicked off one sock and the other hung halfway on my foot, the heel bunched under my arch. The toes of my bare foot sank into the carpet, picking up little bits of fuzz and a strand of tinsel from last Christmas that had somehow survived a year of vacuuming. My sister was sitting cross-legged on the couch flipping through her sticker album, the kind with those big, stiff pages where you could peel and re-stick the scratch and sniffs. She had one shaped like a slice of pizza that smelled vaguely like oregano and bubble gum. She kept shoving it in my face, saying, "Smell this one. It smells just like showbiz pizza." I half listened to her, half followed Casey's voice as he counted down the week's hits. Say, Say, Say by Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson was somewhere near the top, and I remember thinking how strange it was to hear two totally different worlds in one song. Dad was in his recliner, thumbing through the parade insert from the Sunday Dispatch, occasionally making little noises at the articles. The recliner made that familiar creak when he shifted his weight, like a groan from an old man who knew too much. Every so often, the phone on the wall in the kitchen would give a tiny click, the kind of sound it made when the neighbor across the street picked up her receiver at the exact moment our line was resting. You could still eavesdrop if you were careful, but Mom had long since told me that was a good way to lose friends. The TV guide had an ad for Woolworths on the back, a kid in a thick sweater holding a light bright set, grinning like it was the greatest gift in the world. I traced the edge of the ad with my finger, remembering the Woolworths downtown with its creaky wooden floors and the lunch counter that always smelled like grilled cheese and coffee. I hadn't been there in months. We mostly went to Kmart now, which never had the same magic. And there I was, not knowing that in less than an hour, that old TV and a new cable channel would burn something into my brain so deep that, 40 years later, I could still feel the static in my fingertips. That Sunday had the kind of lazy rhythm only November could pull off. No school the next day to worry about. No errands urgent enough to pull us from the house. Just that slow, syrupy afternoon where time seemed to stretch between commercials. You could hear the furnace click on in the basement, rumbling to life with that metallic clang, and feel the faint, warm draft sneaking out from under the big floor vent near the couch. I had moved my spot on the carpet just enough to catch it, letting the heat curl around my ankles. The truth was, I wasn't really interested in what was on TV at the moment. A rerun of Three's Company was playing, and while I liked the goofy misunderstandings, I was waiting for something else, something new. All week, kids at school had been talking about this music television thing like it was the second coming of rock and roll. Jimmy from down the block, the one whose parents seemed to have every gadget before anyone else, told me, "Dude, it's like solid gold but 24/7 and no dumb interviews, just music videos, all the time, like real videos, with costumes and lights and everything." Up until then, music lived in two places for me, on the radio and in my own head. The radio gave you the sound, and your imagination did the rest. But the idea that you could see the music as it happened, that it could be packaged with images and attitude, was something I couldn't quite wrap my head around. I had caught snippets at Jimmy's house during a sleepover, Pat Benatar glaring at the camera in Love is a Battlefield, Billy Joel strolling through a diner in Uptown Girl, but seeing them half asleep under someone else's blanket wasn't the same as owning the moment in my own living room. We hadn't had cable for long. Dad had resisted for months, muttering about paying to watch TV you can already get for free, and 50 channels of nothing. But a week ago, a man from Warner Cable showed up in a beige van with a ladder strapped to the roof. He drilled a neat little hole through the side of our living room wall and fed a gray cable straight into the back of our Zenith. He left behind a heavy brown remote box with a sliding channel selector. The buttons clunked when you pressed them, each one snapping down with the satisfaction of a stapler. There were rows of channels we'd never heard of: USA, TBS, Nickelodeon, and way up near the top, MTV. For the first couple of days, I'd flip through the channels just to hear the names as they appeared. You're watching Nickelodeon, the young people's satellite network, the voice bright and bouncy, or WTBS Atlanta, cable's superstation. But MTV was different. The station IDs were fast, loud, and full of weird animations. Astronauts planting flags on the moon, neon colors flashing, a big M made out of bricks. It felt rebellious, like it wasn't trying to be nice. By mid-afternoon that day, Dad had claimed the TV for football, settling into his recliner with a bag of Wise potato chips balanced on his chest. But after the Browns game ended and he dozed off with the sports section covering his face, I saw my chance. I reached for the remote box, sliding the switch until the red number 24 popped up on the little digital window. The TV flickered, then steadied, and there it was, the MTV logo, shimmering in its corner like a little secret in plain sight. A VJ with big hair and a blazer was talking fast into the camera, the sound spilling out in that slightly tinny way cable always had, as if the signal had traveled across the country just to land in our living room. Behind them, some wild-colored background was spinning, not like the plain studio sets you saw on the network channels, but something that looked alive. It was only a few seconds before the next video started, but I already felt a twinge in my stomach, like standing on the edge of a high dive. I didn't know what was coming, but I had the strange certainty that, once it happened, something in me would be different. Sunday afternoons in our house were like a well-worn record. The same grooves played every week, each scratch and pop part of the charm. Mom was in her floral print apron, the one with a faint grease stain shaped like Florida on the lower left corner, moving between the oven and the counter. Every so often she'd hum along to the radio in the kitchen where American Top 40 still drifted in from the GE clock radio. The signal sometimes fuzzed out when she leaned too close to it, probably because of the microwave sitting beside it, the giant beige one that took up half the counter and made a deep whoomp sound when it turned on. Dad, still half asleep in his recliner, had shifted so the Sunday paper now rested on the floor beside him, its pages splayed out like fallen leaves. From his direction came the soft crackle of the potato chip bag every time his hand searched for another. The smell of the Swanson chicken pot pie had grown richer, mixing with the faint sweetness of the Jell-O 1, 2, 3 cooling in the fridge. Somewhere under all of that was the permanent scent of our living room, a mix of furniture polish, warm dust from the TV, and the faint plasticky smell of the vinyl cover on the armrest. My little sister Amy had moved from her sticker album to the floor, pulling her fashion plates set from under the couch. She'd slide the ridged plastic plates into the purple frame, lay a sheet of paper on top and rub over it with a crayon until a model in bell-bottoms or a disco dress appeared. The crayons were worn to little stubs, and she was using the paper wrapper to hold them so the wax wouldn't melt on her fingers. Every now and then she'd hold one up to me and say, "This one's you," even if it was clearly a drawing of a woman in a feather boa. The TV, left on for background noise, had switched from Three's Company to an old episode of Chips, and you could hear the squeal of police motorcycles as Ponch and John chased someone down the freeway. The colors were always a little faded on syndicated reruns, like they'd been left out in the sun too long. I let it run for a few minutes, but the truth was, my mind was on Channel 24. I picked up the brown cable box remote again, running my thumb along the row of chunky buttons. You could feel the slight wobble of each one, as if they'd been pressed thousands of times before settling into their grooves. The number 24 sat glowing red on the tiny digital display, like it was quietly waiting for me. I switched back just in time to catch the end of a Duran Duran video. The band in sharp suits, a fan blowing through their hair while lights flashed behind them. The VJ came back on, this time a guy with a mullet and a skinny tie, leaning casually on a counter like he was talking to you from a cool older cousin's bedroom. Behind him, the MTV logo kept shifting colors, melting from electric blue to hot pink. He rattled off some names: The Fix, Billy Idol, The Police, then teased something special coming up after the break. Meanwhile, Amy decided to wander to the kitchen, where Mom was spooning Cool Whip over the top layer of the Jell-O 1-2-3. "Not yet," Mom said, swatting her hand away from the dessert. From where I sat, I could see the pale steam from the pot pie escaping in lazy curls each time Mom opened the oven. The warmth of it made the room feel even cozier, like the walls had pulled in closer to wrap us all up. The radiator in the dining room clanked suddenly, that sharp metal knock that always made Amy jump, and the faint sound of kids shouting drifted in from outside. Some neighborhood game was going on, probably kickball or street hockey, but I had no urge to join. Not today. That channel, that glow, was pulling me in. I didn't know what was next, but I could feel it getting closer, just as the VJ was about to announce the special thing he'd been hyping. The picture on our zenith gave a slow, lazy roll, the kind where the image started sliding upward like a film strip coming loose from the projector. The guy's head disappeared off the bottom of the screen only to reappear at the top, upside down for a split second before vanishing again. My stomach dropped. "Oh no, 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 not now," I muttered, crawling toward the TV like I was approaching a wounded animal. The first rule of TV emergencies in our house was, do not let Dad notice, because if he decided the cable wasn't worth the trouble, he'd call Warner the next morning and cancel the whole thing. He was still in the recliner, eyes closed, but I knew from experience that one wrong noise could wake him. The man could sleep through a thunderstorm, but if you touched the TV, he'd somehow sense it in his bones. I reached for the side of the zenith and gave it the lightest smack I could manage. The picture wobbled, then kept rolling. I adjusted the vertical hold knob, that tiny black dial hidden behind a little door under the screen, but it was so sensitive that the picture either froze perfectly or spun like a slot machine. My fingers were sweating, and that only made it harder to grip the knob. "What you doing?" Amy's voice cut in from behind me. She was holding a spoon in one hand, probably stolen from the kitchen. "Shh, go back to Mom," I whispered, waving her off. She didn't move. "It's broke, huh? It's fine, just go." From the kitchen, Mom called out, "Don't mess with that TV, you'll make it worse." Meanwhile, the sound had started to warble, like the VJ was speaking from underwater. Every syllable stretched just enough to make it weird. I fiddled with the fine-tuning knob, another ancient artifact of analog viewing, and finally, after a tense few seconds, the picture steadied. The VJ was back in full view, smiling like nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just survived a near-broadcast meltdown in my living room. But now my heart was racing. I'd already learned that cable could be fickle, static if the wire bent wrong, a rainbow of diagonal lines if someone slammed the front door too hard. Still, when you got it working, it felt like magic, like you'd tamed something wild. Here's what I keep wondering. Even now, Do you remember when watching TV itself felt like a little victory? When you had to adjust the antenna, smack the side of the set, twist a knob just right, and then finally, you were rewarded with the picture? I swear, half the thrill of seeing anything back then was knowing you'd earned it. The VJ's smile faded as the screen cut to black for just a heartbeat. That tiny pause that made you lean forward, wondering what was about to hit. And then it came. A single, sharp guitar chord, bright and clean, slicing through the room. My whole body seemed to straighten without me telling it to. The sound was followed by a slow, steady drum beat, like footsteps coming closer. The darkness on the screen shifted into deep, velvety purple light. At first I could barely make out the shape, just a slim figure in a ruffled white shirt, standing alone, head tilted slightly forward like he was letting the moment breathe. Then the camera came alive, swinging in closer, and there he was, Prince. Not the idea of him, not a fuzzy photo in Rolling Stone, but him, alive, moving, staring into the lens like it was some kind of duel. His hair was a perfect storm, part waves, part wildness, and it caught the purple light in a way that made each strand glow. The ruffled shirt was tucked into high-waisted pants that shimmered with every step. And the way he held his guitar, it wasn't just an instrument, it was an extension of him, like it was breathing the same air. The opening lines of Little Red Corvette slipped out of the speakers, his voice softer than I expected, but charged, like every word was carrying a secret. The music filled the room in a way the Zenith's built-in speakers had never seemed capable of before. Even Dad's breathing from the recliner seemed to sync with the beat. Amy had stopped moving completely, frozen halfway to the couch, spoon still in hand. I'd seen performances on American Bandstand before, people standing stiffly, maybe a little sway, the camera cutting every few seconds. This was different. Prince didn't just perform at the camera, he consumed it. He moved like he knew exactly what you were thinking, and wanted to make you question it. Every step was deliberate, every turn of his head a spark. The colors on the screen were so saturated they almost hummed, purples and reds bleeding into each other like they'd been painted on glass. When he leaned into the mic for the chorus, it was like he was singing directly to me, to my living room, not to millions of strangers across the country. My pulse actually picked up, and I remember thinking, without knowing why, I will never forget this. The guitar solo came in like a sudden rush of wind, fast, sharp, but controlled. His fingers moved so quickly I could barely follow, but every note landed exactly where it was meant to. I'd never seen someone look so completely at home on a stage, even though this was just a video on a Sunday afternoon in Ohio. By the time the last note hung in the air, I wasn't the same kid who had picked up the cable remote 20 minutes earlier. Something had shifted. The screen faded back to black, and for a split second the room felt oddly still. Then the MTV logo appeared spinning in neon, and the VJ's voice came back like someone shaking you awake from a dream. But I stayed sitting there, staring at the empty space where Prince had been, my ears ringing with the last echo of the song. When the video ended, I didn't move. The VJ was already on to the next thing, the Police's Every Breath You Take, but it felt like background noise now, like the world was politely continuing without me while I caught my breath. I sat back against the couch, feeling the soft imprint of the carpet's fibers on my elbows. Even the familiar hum of the TV sounded different, almost gentler, like it knew we'd just shared something important. Mom called from the kitchen. "Dinner's ready. Wash your hands." Her voice pulled me partway back to reality, but I still moved slowly, like I was wading through water. As I passed the TV, I glanced at the screen one more time, half expecting Prince to still be there. Instead, Sting was staring into the camera in black and white, singing about watching someone. But my mind was still lit in purple. At the dining table, Dad was already cutting into his pot pie, steam curling up past his glasses. "So, how's that cable?" he asked without looking up. I just nodded, not trusting myself to put it into words. Amy, of course, had no such problem. "We saw a man in a ruffly shirt singing about a car," she announced between bites. Mom gave a puzzled laugh. Well, as long as you're not watching anything bad. The thing was, I didn't know if what I'd just seen was bad in the way parents meant. It wasn't like anything I'd been taught to like. It was bolder, sharper, stranger, and it made everything else I'd seen on TV look a little pale. I kept replaying it in my head as I ate. The flash of light off the guitar, the way his voice dipped in that second verse, the feeling that the world outside our house was a lot bigger than I'd realized an hour ago. After dinner, while Mom cleared plates and Dad settled back into his recliner with a mug of Sanka, I wandered back into the living room and sat cross-legged on the carpet again. The remote box sat there like a magic key. I flipped through a few more channels. A rerun of Solid Gold, an old Columbo episode, a commercial for Sears showing a family in matching sweaters, but nothing came close to what had just happened. Eventually, I switched the TV off. The sudden silence was almost startling. Without the hum of the zenith, I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock in the kitchen, the muffled sound of a car passing outside, and the wind brushing against the siding. I sat there in the dim light, staring at my reflection in the blank TV screen, wondering if I'd ever see anything like that again. And here's the thing. I didn't know it then, but that moment, Prince in that purple glow, would stay with me. Through high school, through cassette tapes worn thin from overplaying, through the first car I ever drove with the windows down and the volume up. Even now, if I close my eyes, I can still see it exactly as it was. The deep carpet under my knees, the smell of pot pie in the air, the hum of the old zenith, and a voice that made the walls of our Ohio living room feel like they were stretching all the way to another universe. Some memories fade into vague impressions. This one never did.